Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today we are having a first to one lounge, 5 rounds, for various reasons. There's not particularly a lot to say about it other than that people will be rotating in and out once again. Things may be a little harder than usual, and that I'm playing Korean for the first match for various reasons also. But you should ignore it because I'm terrible at Korean. But that does bring us to the concept of why people are bad at certain characters, either expectations or adaptations. I know how to fight Amar fairly well, but I don't necessarily know, despite my ability to somewhat do Korean combos. The spacings matter a lot. The little things matter a lot. When to do pressure matters a lot. Muscle memory helps in many cases, but the base principles of why certain things are done don't necessarily change much. And lots of the Abigail matchup is, at least between the two of us, heavily based on footsies and things I already understand because I've mostly been the one to talk about them. So I'm not helpless here. Adaptation, however, requires that you are able to not only play your own game, but understand what your opponent is doing at the same time. And as soon as you play a character or face a situation that isn't familiar enough, the second one of those tends to go away. Because you're so focused on trying to figure out what you should be doing, that you're not really paying the same type of attention to what your opponent is doing. And it can sometimes make you forget things that are actually normal for you to remember or do in the matchup. Using your own special methods for playing through, based on character, also changes a lot of the game. For example, I will keep on using Mujin Kaku in this matchup, even though it's not strictly a great idea. And it's not really because of Amara specifically, but it does help that the opposing Abigail is going to try for certain things that will occasionally be caught by this move. Basically, you can stop Abigail from jumping at a certain range with it, because you'll barely clip, and you can get some other stuff done, and you'll end up in the right space for certain other buttons. You'll also end up playing in this position where you're much more likely to be hit for doing certain things. But I'm okay with that, I like playing like that in general. For Amara, this means that this matchup becomes a lot more like a jury matchup when facing me on Korean. Because the spacings and the whiff punishes change to the type that she's normally used to facing from jury, and she therefore armors through many more things. Does that work? Nope. Oh well.
You lose.
That gives us a bit of time to shift character, and it was partially also because we were testing whether or not the connection, as we've mentioned on previous streams, the connection between these two stations, despite them being very close to each other, is often bad, and we don't know why. But today it looks like it's okay-ish, sorta. That said, we're shifting character today, since she has no particular interest in playing Karine at the moment. If you're going to be practicing adaptations, sometimes it helps to have to adapt back to your own secondary. If you're not the sort of person who is a pro and practices constantly with your secondary or has a good reason to play them for long periods at a time, you can sometimes forget certain things and end up with rereading. It's similar to having unfamiliar matchups with your main, except that the focus is on yourself instead of on the opponent, which is also really important. We've gotten, therefore, a match today that is, basically, I am going to be fighting familiar people with my slightly less familiar character. All of this is based on focus, and that's our topic for today, even though you're not necessarily going to hear that much said on stream. Since the matchups are familiar, for the most part, until we see someone else join, which is unlikely because it is, as usual, a US East Coast lobby, and it is specifically both 5 rounds first to 1, and characters let off. So we're basically only expecting team members and anyone who specifically chooses to join because they know that we normally have these. Might get lucky, someone might come in, but for now, that's our general assumption. And that means we won't have to think too much about that because a lot of the interactions are going to be relatively well known. And the few that aren't are probably not necessarily something we're going to cover right away. You might get some commentary from Kansuki Dynasty herself, as is often the case in these situations. And you'll get to watch Mara run through everyone, as is normally the case in these situations. We'll be watching for special interactions, but you can expect mostly a quiet stream, with players, once again, trying really hard to focus on little bits. One of the matchups you are likely to get some explanations about is this one. We've discussed the Abigail matchup a couple of times, specifically for how Necalli can get in, the dive kick, being able to use the B skill. In both cases, actually, we have learned that yes, you can actually B skill Abigail because of the very specific aspects of that projectile speed. It means that Abigail's counters don't always work precisely. So you can at least think about how to use it properly and hopefully not get light punched or something. Because interestingly, light kick tends to result in Abigail still getting hit even though Necalli has not completely finished the animation, which doesn't really benefit anyone, but the point is you can definitely get away with it without taking too much damage. So the wolf is free to use that basically the same way. In fact, it might slightly be more effective than actually going for the Seismo. We're not sure yet because the close range combat, other things it allows, combos it helps with. Abigail's not a character that normally is terrified of setups, for example, due to the large health and particularly good spacings for armor and similar. But we may have a couple of things to say about it as we go through, mainly based on the dive kick. Wins. But speaking of dive kicks, it's Cammy time. Maybe not right away, but we're definitely going to see mostly Cammy today. Our lounge will probably be going on for the usual amount of time, but not all of the players you're used to seeing will be sticking around for that long. It's go time. And basically, if you are anywhere in the Midwest, Europe, but with really good internet, I guess Midwest should also be technically really good internet depending on who joins. If you're early, Atlantic Rim, anywhere from north of South America, Caribbean, UK, anywhere along that edge. If your internet is good, you can come from a little further in. We don't mind the lag that much if it frustrates you, obviously. Don't come here and be frustrated. No one wants that for you. But we're not the type to stress out about it, and we're not the type to play very heavily in ways that take advantage of lag, because that's not what we're focused on today anyway. Now, the interesting thing about the dive kick in this matchup is that Cammy can't afford to do the same things as Nikali. Cammy's dive kick doesn't cause her to hang in the air for anywhere near as long, meaning that even if she jumps high and does the dive kick, she generally won't have any options. What she does have a really great use for the dive kick for is that she can use it to counter nearly anything Abigail does at mid to long range neutral, where she doesn't have a button that reaches, but Abigail does. The problem with this is that she requires basically a near instant dive kick, but thankfully not an instant one. Normally Cammy's dive kick is about spacing. You're trying to get to the correct position, either to do an instant one or not. And you don't really want to be too predictable about when you're going to jump, but that's the point. If Abigail is constantly playing, thinking about the fact that you might jump, then you get a lot more freedom to push around and bully Abigail in neutral at max range of Cammy's normals, without too much problems. Abigail's easiest answer to this, to believe it or not, is to just parry in neutral. This is because Cammy's crush counters don't reach. This is particularly true if the Cammy player spends too much time doing their crouch medium kick, because then Abigail can crouch parry in neutral and won't get hit by the heavy kick anyway. But, again, this is the stress part, this is the focus part. You're going to have to deal with all of the many options Cammy has if she puts together those three things. Fortunately, you won't see this much at high level play because Cammy takes too much damage. Basically, you're relying on the Abigail player not being able to outplay you in neutral so heavily that your health is gone in 2 interactions. But that also goes from the other side. If that was happening, this never came up. You never needed this moment of, hey, let's just hang out in neutral and do basically nothing and you're poking at me. Abigail players will find their way in some way, and you are mostly focused on bat dashes, when to go for cannon spike, when to forward jump into stuff. Defense becomes your focus on Cammy's side at that point. So it's not really a skill that you need very much at high levels against most people, but you will find the occasional really, really patient Abigail who doesn't try to delete you with good health attacks or big damage off normals. And when that does happen, it's a useful skill to have. The ability to just force Abigail to play neutral by making Abigail consider what will happen if you dive kick. From the Abigail side, you're already seeing Amara do the correct thing for it. Basically, you just do a bunch of armored runs. There's basically no downside to armored run as a reaction to Cammy stuff. She can absolutely hooligan, and she can hooligan fairly heavily in this matchup if she thinks Abigail is going to defend. But armored run beats most hooligan things because of spacing and timing stuff, so in general, you don't get very far with it. But Cammy is light and can be thrown very high. The double KO shortened our match a bit, but still good. So you're going to see a lot of neutral dive kick play, and Abigail has more solutions than that, but a lot of them are very stressful to do. And honestly, Abigail doesn't have a whole lot of other uses for the meter in that matchup if you're not playing defensively. If you're playing very defensively, it's great to just confirm into super off of any mistake Cammy makes and watch her health melt, but assuming that you weren't getting that particular situation set up, or that for some reason you didn't have meter and Cammy just basically stopped once you did and either rode out the life lead or won some other way, there's still some benefits to knowing when to EX run. She's a difficult character to deal with once you've started pressure properly, but Abigail can do that too. Yes, run through the pressure, or just take the hits or the throws or whatever comes, because Abigail is one of the characters who can take the most of Cammy's throws without having to care about it, and is also one of the hardest characters for Cammy to push to the corner just through straight pressure. This matchup, however, we're not going to have a whole lot to say about, both because these players play this on a totally different level than what you'd expect from the matchup as a generality, because they know each other well. And secondarily, because we have talked about that before, both in the sense of, hey, this is why this works like that, and their own special brand of ham? Ham is probably the right word. There's no specific thing you can say because they will focus and adapt around each other very fast. There's times when Amara's best option would be to parry through a ton of stuff, hit crouch medium kicks and so on. And times when parrying is a terrible idea and will lead to nothing good. The one thing you can see that will probably be consistent, sort of, I don't think this is actually as laggy on their side as it appears on the screen. Actually, technically I can see that and verify that it sort of is, but not in the same way. Either way, the timings for a lot of things are the counterintuitive ones between these two, so I'm not going to explain a lot of it. It won't really teach you much about the matchup. It'll teach you a lot about them. And we're not dealing with that today. We're going to see a lot of the use of Alex's dive elbow today, which is in itself an adaptation to the way Abigail moves. Other characters end up going over it most of the time, whereas Abigail doesn't tend to get his hurt box out of the way quickly enough or move high enough in most jumps to do this. So you get to play a lot of positioning. Ooh, back jump. One of the few ways out of that. Forward jump also works. This is why we specifically tell you, please forward jump against Abigail. Almost all of Abigail's really good corner pressure is defeated by you holding up forward. And this is even if you get like poked and Abigail goes for light kick on your wake up. Still hold up forward because the next thing coming after that is a command grabbing you and then you will just jump out of that. There are definitely ways to beat it, but those are the ways that are most likely to be reversaled. And therefore your other options, it's just not necessary. You don't need to do much else. Got a slight mentor-student thing going on here, so once again I will have basically nothing to say, and in fact, we're just going to rotate around probably to silence for a while. Since the Alex matchup on Cammy is one that Kansuke Dynasty understands relatively well, but whether or not she can take on All Might's particular style is going to depend again on focus and adaptation. So, enjoy the next, say, 10 to 20 minutes of relatively silent, high-speed adaptation, probably. And I'll be back around then, especially if anyone has joined, to talk about what we have seen.
Round 2. Fight. KO.
Looks like you could use more training.
Round 3. Fight.
Right here. Head. Yeah. No more tip. Yeah.
Alex wins. It's go time. Let's do this. Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight! Got it!
You could use more training.
Round 3. Fight!
Well, it looks like the lag that we were seeing by whatever magic of connection has specifically to do with this station to All Might, but it's that really weird sided double rollback that makes the game go into slow motion, because I actually don't even know, because Street Fighter's Connect code keeps on saying it's not supposed to do that. That said, a stuttery slow motion, while it is basically not liked, if it's resulting from some form of implemented rollback, probably is the best of both worlds in a really weird way. In that you are still having the problem of, can I confirm my stuff, can I do my moves, whatever else. But you're not strictly having the, oh, I don't know what happened here so I can't confirm anything. You're still gonna get it though, so this might not be one of the better matchups to actually have seriously happening on stream today. I doubt it's gonna resolve itself or anything. There's no way to understand that happening. So we're probably not going to see these two facing off. We can always, and always do, treat these as learning experiences because you can actually learn a lot from being pushed to play in effectively slow motion. It lets your mind slow down and take better advantage of the information, and maybe even understand what happened frame by frame without actually having to go into the replay for it. But it's still not an enjoyable experience overall, so presumably they won't be wanting to repeat that too much.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
Looks like I've got more horsepower.
Round three. Fight! Let him hit. Round one. Fight!
Looks like I've got more horsepower.
Round two. Fight!
We've already seen quite a few adaptations based on precisely that. The possibility of Akali's V skill to forcing Abigail to block for longer, given that Abigail isn't really a character who has easy bypasses for it, and Giant Flip, for example, can be countered relatively easily. The animation and recovery don't really allow Abigail to generally hit through it, and without some stronger mobility tools, that, when placed correctly, is going to be one of those things that you have to worry about. Cute Socks has joined us.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight! In my grasp. Primordial flame. Round two. Fight. Round three. Fight! Time to return to harmony. Seraphic wing! Cryokinesis, can you endure the pain? Now burn! It is time to proceed with the plan. Round four. Fight! Cryokinesis! Meteor!
A large part of the adaptation for parry characters when facing an opponent who jumps repeatedly, knowing that they will sometimes jump empty and sometimes jump with attacks, is to be ready for the protect. It depends on the character because some characters have much better pressure on their jumping than others, and therefore you care a lot more rather you have to care a lot more.
Time to return to harmony.
But it's definitely something you have to think about within the match as, well, I can't parry every time, and it's not helpful to not parry every time. So you still have to guess, let's say, on certain times, but you can extend this, especially when you don't have a lot of problems or haven't got life lead down or whatever else, or you're comfortable in your defense. You can just block jump-ins, even when you have anti-air options, simply to make your opponent more likely to jump.
It's go time.
And even go so far as to manipulate the situation so that they jump at the time when you're capable of making the most of it. Oh, we went into this match again. Well, it looks like it's probably going to be as bad as last time, so we'll see what happens.
Harmony.
Round one. Fight.
Smash.
In my grasp. Primordial flame.
Round two. Fight.
Pyrokinesis. Get in my grasp. Primordial flame.
Round three. Fight.
Pyrokinesis. Die. Icy orb. Icy orb. Now burn.
KO. Round four. Fight.
Fall down. return to harmony. Seraphic wing! Welcome to your death.
You lose.
Sometimes your adaptations take you through a whole list of things that you probably don't have to deal with normally. In fact, my playing of Karine at the beginning of the stream was intended to bring up that point so I could reference it later. In many situations, you will meet an opponent, especially online, who has a very different idea of how a matchup can or should be played than you do, and particularly than most people's common sense would dictate. It might be because they've found a really effective tool and learned the spacing really well. There's always players like that. There's always players who will be able to do something you did not think was a good idea, because it's only not a good idea when you don't spend 10 hours a week practicing it, and after about a month of that you've put in 40 hours on this one spacing, and now you can do it perfectly. No one else in the world probably wants to, but you definitely can.
Round one. Fight.
This doesn't always happen because they've actually practiced that long, simply because that happens to be the way they've learned to play the character, and nothing has ever stopped them. It can be frustrating though, because it means that something that seems like a terrible idea, to the point where probably in most serious matches you play, the opponent just never bothers going for it, or goes for it only as a shenanigan because they know it can be punished heavily or can be easily dealt with by a simple adaptation. Things shift because they literally don't have any reason not to do it. You have never demonstrated it, they've somehow never fought anyone, or they're good enough at it that most people don't stop it, and you find yourself facing someone who consistently does this thing that you know theoretically how to defeat, but can you physically do it often enough to discourage them? Adapting around this is one of the most important parts of this game, and being calm about it can be really hard for some people. Obviously, we attempt to provide bots because bots tend to do more random things, but they do them consistently. Even if the fact that the bots do go from one action to another, have hidden inputs, do different things to make sure that they're very dynamic, you can still be reasonably certain that the way that a certain thing happens in the long term will average out to be based on situation X. Our Kage bot will do uppercuts at this time, depending on how you input it, because that's the timing it's possible for Kage bot to do uppercuts. He has like 3. But that's still helpful. It's still saying Kage bot can only uppercut in 3 ways at 3 times after 3 situations. Technically after 6 situations, because some of them have to do with blocking and some of them have to do with other animations, but overall you are still limited. You understand by doing this that, oh, this is not a good thing, but it happens repeatedly, and you get used to watching for those and adapting to them. Juri's defense against Gil is related to this actually, because Juri doesn't have to do a whole lot against Gil in the first place. Gil is good at chasing Juri, and she can do a lot of jump, Ryodan, Satsu, whatever else, to basically disrespect almost all of Gil's zoning, and still win it in neutral with normals. In fact, playing close to Gil is basically unnecessary. It just results in Juri taking more damage and having to deal with all of Gil's various stuff. It's very much more execution testing, as you're seeing here, than just hanging out at the other end of the screen.
Round 4.
But, on the other hand, you could have a Juri that has learned to pass that execution test every time. Meaning that your thought is, well, Juri wants to hang out over there, she doesn't have any reason to play in close to me where she has to take risks and cause herself problems. That's only true for the Juri that doesn't want to take risks, or who considers having to deal with Gil's lariat or particular types of spacing to be a risk. A Juri that techs every throw, blocks and punishes every lariat, and perfectly times all of her responses to very specific things, doesn't really need to get around guild zoning at all. And in fact, as you've just seen demonstrated, can entirely charge her V-skill just to make sure she's never cornered. This is a completely different concept of how to play this matchup than you'd assume based on the fact that she has tools for getting around zoning. That, for example, could have been the round. A Juri who had that down, even considering that that move can be differently disadvantaged, would probably have managed something either because the opponent thinks they've managed to punish it so many times that she might get a throw, or because they will actually get the punish. We can also see some other things that the Juri plans to do based on, okay, I'm not sure that I'm actually advantaged enough, but as a result I can hit this and be fine. So practicing your own special ways of doing things can help you, but really, really good players will eventually adapt around you doing this to the point where it doesn't matter anymore. There are other crazier things you can do in this game. You can throw a Gil out of Lariat. Not every time, but there are certainly positions on the screen where throw as a response to a long-range incoming Lariat works for certain characters. Command grabs in particular are good at this because they reach slightly further without necessarily extending your hurt box. You can definitely learn some relatively crazy things in this game. But if you spend too much time practicing them, and then still fail, it can be really discouraging. This is a matchup we definitely don't see often. Dwarf is not necessarily hanging around for as long as usual, so we'll see how it goes. But Juri's concept of how to play this matchup normally involves jumping without actually intending to hit, because it puts Nikali in some really bad positions. She gets to go out of all of his dash stuff, go under this guidance, be ready for air throws. A lot of the time, Nikali has to deal with this by forward jump and a very well-timed aerial heavy kick, instead of trying to anti-air. So we're gonna have to see if the Wolf can air to air, or if Cute Socks decides to actually jump at all, which will bring us back to our other point. You can definitely jump in this matchup as Juri. Will that be the thing that they go for, or do they have a different idea of how to play this matchup altogether? The problem with being so on guard is that this is also likely to happen. If the player is aware that you jump in this matchup, or can jump in this matchup, they're mentally looking for jump spacings, which makes it much harder for Nikali to jump for similar reasons. Juri's air-to-airs are good, even against Nikali's very strong, relatively, air buttons, meaning that a lot of the time she doesn't have to anti-air either. She recognizes situations more because they're both focused on the same thing. The fact that they are walking around, you can almost see it now. There's not a whole lot of actual footsies going on. They are moving, blocking, and looking for moments where they might be able to convince the other that footsies is about to happen. But they're both looking for that specific perfect moment and timing to jump, which has to be built up through distraction and making the opponent think about other things. That move in particular helping Juri quite a lot. This isn't to say, oh well, you never need to bother with footsies. Footsies absolutely does happen, but it's worthwhile to remember that sometimes the player is not trying to beat you up with their footsies. They're just distracting you until they can do the thing they want to do. Perfectly jumped. Crosscut DP is the only thing that would have mattered there, and the reward for this landing, even if it gets blocked, is much higher than hey, did my opponent manage to cross up DP me when I had a massive life lead? Nakali's cross up DP isn't actually even that good because it acts very weird sometimes. I'm not sure if it's that it can be safe jumped or what, but if you were going for the attack it didn't matter. This can be combined even further with jumps that actually should be anti-aired, because your opponent is mentally spaced to, okay, I should deal with these jumps without necessarily anti-airing. But as you can see there, goes over disc guidance, gets to a good position from there too. There are just a couple of good reasons to jump as a serious plan in this matchup. Interestingly, we've gone through this in a tournament before when it was the opposite way around, where Laura wants to jump at Juri a lot. Because one missed jump, especially if Juri is trying to play footsies too hard, leads to Laura getting really big damage. Whereas Juri dominates neutral a little too much and can easily get around clap compared to other characters. Nakali also isn't a character who has a whole lot of really great responses to the position that happens after one person has jumped and gone too far past. The cross-up failed, you went completely over their head. Nakali has slightly slower options there and doesn't benefit that much from longer range pressure. In other words, he's a character that if he hits you with his matched range stand medium punch, he doesn't necessarily get much out of this. Charge characters, this is actually fairly common. But most charge characters, or characters that have any charge moves, are slightly more effective at this because they have at least something they hit after that medium punch. It might be predictable and not necessarily going to break the opponent's defense or anything, but they get to create space that is beneficial to them, whereas Nakali really doesn't get that very much. He can probably do that into Stomp, but Stomp has a startup that Juri can actually see coming, get around, backdash out of. It's just difficult. The result is that without the air-to-airs, the match was a strain, more so than anything else. But looks like Cute Socks will not necessarily be facing Amara, maybe not staying, who knows. No, well, they at least thought it was good, so.
Let's do this.
For some reason my mind thought of this match as the strongest versus the angriest, but I don't actually know which direction was which. That is a team in-joke though, so I will leave you to watch the match and decide for yourself which is which.
Round one. Fight! Round 2. Fight!
Looks like I've got more horsepower.
Round 3. Fight! Round 4. Fight! Abigail wins. It's go time. Let's do this. Round 1. Fight! Round 3. Fight!
Our lounge is now full and it looks like our players are shifting to having more fun. This is not, however, to us at least, a matter of playing less seriously or even not playing main characters, which is what a lot of people do for fun. While it is an absolutely reasonable way to try to have fun in specific situations, generally more so other games, Street Fighter doesn't tend to require it as much. The reason why other games often are, hey, I'm playing this character to have more fun, or have different fun at least, is simply because many of the other fighting games that you'd play, other than like DOA and Tekken, are for reasonably long periods, quote-unquote one-player games. They have long combos that are mostly the player setting up the situation, and that's the part where they really require a lot of interaction between two players, and then after that is about 10 to probably 20 seconds of one person showing off their execution by finishing their combo in the most fabulous way possible. Depending on the game, this can actually be fairly interactive, like Guilty Gear, because you don't know when in Guilty Gear your opponent's just gonna not let you combo them anymore. And because Guilty Gear's meter for stopping this actually rolls over between matches, well, between rounds, you can build some strategy around it, but you won't be able to just do it. Contrast, for example, Dragon Ball FighterZ, where once the player does it, they definitely usually have the ability to do it at any time. Obviously, Sparking Blast is given at the beginning of the round, but forcing them to do sparking just to get out of stuff, it's more so a combat mechanic. You don't use it in the same way that burst is used in Guilty Gear.
It's go time. Let's do this.
I think this was a little better last time. It probably may hold up better this time. We'll see what happens, of course. Managing to evolve and hold your focus through the match is often what makes it more fun. Presuming that your opponents are of relatively equal skill and have some reasonably similar idea of how the game is meant to be played than you.
Round 1. Fight!
Because there are those opponents who play the game in ways that you're really not fond of or just don't enjoy. And no matter how good you technically are at dealing with those players, a lot of the time you could beat them with absolute perfect precision, literally, and still not enjoy it. This depends a lot on what you find fun in games, and you might often, if that's the way you expect to be playing, if you know you're really good and generally the only way you're going to lose is by your opponent doing things you really don't like, then you might want to choose a different game. Street Fighter and Guilty Gear, however, have that problem where the characters are relatively varied, and sometimes it can feel like you're not even playing the same game between two rounds between the same characters.
Round 2. Fight!
So there's something to be considered there. No, it looks like it got worse, presumably because of not ending up on... Well, if the stages were going to affect it, this would probably be the biggest culprit. Not necessarily because that whole animation of the welcome sign in the background is actually difficult, it has to do with parallax stuff. From what little I know of 3D programming, I would more so blame the presence. But, again, even that is really just a matter of processing power being slightly more strained.
A foolish insect that dares to defy me.
Round 3. Fight.
GPUs, however, handle all this sort of thing pretty well, so I wouldn't think about it that way. Throw in some good shaders and you're good to go. So, basically, we're still really heavily out on that whole, hey, this is going to cause things to be slower. Because otherwise that would probably have lagged, but it doesn't. That was a lot of damage, but that's what Urian does. No meter though to finish it, so yeah, that was gonna get dicey either way.
Round 4. Fight.
That said, the lag type we're getting makes everything dicey. It literally looks like it. But you can already see how players think about each other's flows based almost entirely on that. The type of lag Street Fighter has means that most of the time if you attack a throw in lag, it's because you expected the throw, not necessarily because you reacted to it. Again, most of the time. You were at least primed for it.
You lose.
But All Might pushes on through the lounge, which again is now full. It may not be full for long, so you can probably check back in about 10 minutes or so if it hasn't already cleared up one spot. It might have. We'll see in a moment. And the lounge itself probably will be going on for another hour-ish, even though the stream is likely to end somewhere just after 9. Now we're still full for now, which makes me think this is probably the most last match of the night. Once again, if you do want to join, it is 5 rounds first to 1 with character select off. We are missing some of the usual suspects, so we did end up making things one slot smaller. Helps everyone rotate around faster, basically because the other Nikali Wolf chose not to be a Wi-Fi warrior and is currently without access to wired.
Round 1. Fight.
Here we have Darkness Falls, the match. This color is usually not so well executed in these games. It looks relatively good this time. I think it might be banned in certain people's tournaments for various reasons. There are definitely stages on which you could be that make this kind of bad. But Grid is definitely not one of those stages, and overall, therefore,
Round 2.
it's a pretty nice look to be looking at. V-Skill and V-Trigger 2 on both sides, meaning that even if you knew this matchup from long ago, there's some possibilities that have opened up here. Urian interacts relatively well with Nikali's V-Skill 2, isn't terribly afraid of it or bothered by it compared to V-Skill 1 in most situations. But if you think you can get enough knockdowns, you might still have something, as charge characters are often forced to respond to things only once. It's very important to remember this when you're picking a character. When someone tells you that they have an invincible reversal, that's not the same thing on a charge character as it is on a Shoto character, for example. You can mash uppercut. You can just do the uppercut motion until the uppercut happens because blocking has stopped. You can't do that for Urian's EX headbutt because once you've done it once, you still have to build back up the charge to try to do it again. So definitely keep that in mind. You do have to spend a lot more time practicing how to do your reversal when playing a charged character, which is partially why you don't see Guile players just doing that all the time, and they tend to do it a little more preemptively. Oof, goes for the big confirm, make sure that you get at least one more round out of this.
Round 4. Fight!
Urian's jump art can cause Mikali some trouble in particular because Mikali's anti-air doesn't work as well against both Violence Knee Drop and a standard cross-up jump. You therefore have to be able to recognize these pretty well. The Wolf demonstrating a good solution to this is actually that because Jurian's jump arc is like that and his bigger jump-ins are not usually used, you can in fact just anti-air jab, as it is known from long ago, against a lot of Urian's setup situations based on jumping. However, the timing and correct flow for doing this against the knee drop is really hard, and your best option is actually related to back dashing. That said, you could do the anti-air jab and then backdash. The actual Violence Knee Drop animation is quite long. The problem being that if you are too close, it will still not work. So, it's another one of those things where you could build up a lot of focus, you could build up a lot of confidence by doing things perfectly, practicing them for a long time, and it lead to a good situation. Or you could be completely messed up because your opponent is willing to keep doing it because they don't believe in that. They don't believe in your ability to jab, backdash, uppercut, crouch heavy punch all of the time. So they jump and violence knee a lot and you end up frustrated. Try not to get too frustrated. You can always train more. And a lot of the time the pain that we feel, for those of us who actually feel it from fighting games, the salt, the misery, comes from the feeling that your opponent is either laughing at you or is just out to humiliate you in some way. But a lot of the time they're not, and if they are, I can't say those people get theirs or anything like that. I'm not going to. Some people just enjoy living life like that, and games don't generally care whether or not you are nice to others. It's where you get people talking about Care Bears and complaining that they exist. Games reward skill, and therefore those who have the emotional fortitude to build up that skill do better. So you can see what you can do emotionally to get yourself out of those feelings, and for everything else there's bots. We will continue to endeavor to make our bots most capable of, at least at some points, doing the most annoying thing possible. On loop. Not constantly, but you know, it's in there. It's definitely that Urian that can absolutely do this particular thing. I can't explain it because All Might doesn't actually do it as a spammy thing. But we'll absolutely do this specific spammy thing over and over and over. And yes, it's super counterable, but you're not expecting it the 6th time. Urian got that. Shoutouts to our Urian bot for being completely weird and very useful for many things. Unfortunately, a pain to input, given the whole very precise charge timing difference between Violence Knee and Headbutt. Don't feel bad if your Urian bot does not Headbutt or does not Violence Knee. It takes a while to input that correctly. We'd offer to help, even through share play, but we're not usually much more successful. It's partially luck and retrying and basically the level of doing a challenge, except you don't know if it's right until much later. Stressful. Fortunately, for the footsies portions and most of his other functions, he actually does work pretty well without one or the other. You might want to generally pick the one that does more headbutts if you are a pressury player, and one that does more violence knee if you are a character player who lacks the ability to easily counter it.
Round 3. Fight!
has a lot more options than Gil in this case. Mainly because Fireball is chargeable, and honestly you can close in with Headbutt easier than most of Gil's close-in options. So even though Urien does have 2 charge, Juri has a lot more things to think about in neutral, and Urien can just play from further away, meaning that Juri needs her V skill even more. And at max range, Fuha charges don't do that much for you, meaning that you have to be fairly good on the execution when you do get your openings, or you're just going to eventually get beaten by out damage regardless of how good you are at actually playing the interaction part. Combine this with Urien having what we call heavy hitboxes. He tends to beat out other characters a lot if they both attack at the same time. And he doesn't often get knocked out of his own moves. Whereas Juri, with her light hitboxes, this happens to her a lot. She trades a lot, she gets hit out of her moves a lot. She has very precisely targeted hitboxes for striking, but it doesn't always work out. We now have one more slot open again. And we're heading into our high octane match. It's probably going to be slightly less high octane because it is Urien, but All Might definitely knows enough Urien combos and similar to get through this. The question is, are there enough to get through OmniRabbit's experience in this matchup? Because it's relatively easy for OmniRabbit to carefully control and sometimes dominate matchup with Urien, but there's always that one mistake into big damage. That normally requires Aegis Reflector, but can be done with Tyrant Pressure in very specific situations, more so because of the corner carry and ability to push her out without using out any meter, because doing this without having to use meter means the other form of big damage from Urien happens. It sort of evens out Urien's damage over time. Meaning that it combines best with this V skill, as Laura has no really easy ways to get to Urien from really far away if he decides to get there and then, instead of full zoning, power up the projectile for the next strike. Whereas Urien has a lot more flexibility and freedom in terms of mid-screen movement. It's just a matter of taking more risks. However, All Might is definitely comfortable taking relatively heavy risks. And even without whatever slight lag there probably is, OmniRabbit does not always react to these things, because defensive mindsets are straining on your focus when you don't feel as if you have a good enough read on your opponent. And particularly gutsy opponents are hard to get good reads on. Fortunately, Laura does have what we often refer to as the Illuminati button, the crouch heavy punch that beats basically every character connected to this fight. Colleen, Gil, Urien, Penalty Dictator, although that's not really connected directly.
Round 3. Fight.
Point is that if you are a Laura player and you don't know what to do in these matchups, there's a lot more spaces where you can hit crouch heavy punch than you might ever think there are. It helps reduce some of the strain on your requirements for playing mid-range neutral, and therefore reduces your stress somewhat. Here's the corner push, but in this case it didn't turn into that and almost got reversed. Do remember that because that move is basically not disadvantaged enough though, Urien gets to do a fair amount of stuff after it, and you are still having at least a bit of a guess. That said,
Lara wins.
explosive enough damage is hard to do with this particular setup. You have to play a lot more crisply, let's say. I could absolutely believe that this sort of thing would be a blow up if Unrabbit were to first, for example, Ryan Hart using V skill and V trigger too. But it's a kind of an uphill struggle for other players at this time as far as we've seen.
Let's do this.
That's how you start the fight and finish it quickly.
Round one. Fight.
Let's see what you've got. That was so close.
Round two. Fight.
One can almost obviously see the results of Suntere's practice on Instant Air Fireball, which is a critical part of Akuma's matchup against many grapplers. Not all, but it does depend on the mindset of the opposing player. Defensive ones who are waiting for Akuma to make mistakes, though, often don't fare too well against this move because you don't actually know whether or not that's what it's going to be, meaning that you get into positions where you can be crossed up. And generally the only one that can easily deal with this at that spacing is Zangief. But Zangief also loses if you just do the air Zanku at a particular spacing regardless of anything else, and has to deal with stand heavy kick along with other really specific Akuma options. Meaning that Zangief plays a lot of very specific defensive spacing against the Akumas who know how to do the instant air fireball, particularly if they choose not to do it as an instant move anyway. Unfortunately for Akuma, it's not easily possible to build up a whole lot of random V-meter in that matchup to get even more options off the air fireball. So Zangief doesn't end up being dominated by the flow of projectiles from all directions and so on.
Let's do this.
But this likely to be explosive match will bring us to the end of our stream for tonight. Once again, we should have one slot open. Feel free to join it if you would like to play. We're probably going for another hour-ish, even if not everyone is likely to stay all that long. And as Street Fighter offers no loser stays on option in lounges, know that you will probably be fighting whoever won, though given the current focus, we can't necessarily guarantee you that this will be, oh, you got the best opponent, because it's a little too relative for that, especially with people who are too familiar with each other's playstyles. You can come in and be the winner that stays on, though.
Round 2. Fight.
This matchup requires a lot of work on both sides, definitely more than I could go through in this stream within the one match we're gonna get. We have touched on it before, but it's a lot of mental focus on both sides to do 3 specific things slightly differently. Doing 3 different things differently in one match is rough. And since neither of these players plays much like the bot that of the character that they play, their main practice has to be against each other. Fortunately for them, it's really a rare matchup in that most other players of the character don't play like their teammate. Amara's understanding of Omni-Rabbit Laura doesn't tend to apply to other Laura, or be required. Therefore, Laura Bot is much more helpful. I think she has the 1.4 version that I think we still don't have up because it doesn't work properly for everyone. It's very character specific, and we're still not sure how to explain the inputs. You can of course request that at any time you would like by contacting us through our contact page at 2-mk.org. If you just have general questions, you can DM us on Twitter. You'll see it probably around the time we're going to stream, and I'll probably come up with some answer for you in that space. You can find that Twitter at 2_MK_FGC, and it will generally tell you, with basically no advance warning, whether or not we are streaming that night. We generally now stream on Mondays and Thursdays as a given. Wednesdays we'll probably be hosting some stuff or maybe having in-betweens bi-weekly. And Tuesdays are usually up in the air, but we're expecting Guilty Gear more so than anything else in the coming months. Friday content is generally reserved for bot work and bot explanations, and until Dan comes out, we're not likely to have those. I'm dreading making the Dan bot for many reasons. Mostly because no one at low level is going to go, yeah, I want to play Dan, and therefore show me a bunch of Dan first order strategies. I'm going to have to get those somewhere else. This has been Really in 14-2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.